All right, good morning, or whatever time of the day you're watching this. This is Hard Questions for Christians. I'm Paul Miller, and I'm with
Tim Ball.
Tim Ball. And today we're going to talk about Moses. We have a question from Cohen. Why did God ask Moses to let his people free? Austin asks, why did Moses go to the burning bush just to meet God, and why? And then Jillian asks, what is Moses' brother's name? All right, so Moses has kind of a cool story. He grows up, and before he's even a grown up, right, he's rescued by the princess of Egypt in the Nile, and he grows up in Pharaoh's court. Now, there's some scholars who believe that the princess who rescued him may have been Hatshepsut, who later on rules Egypt as Pharaoh. It would be probably the right time frame. It's possible it was her. She's one of the few people who, like in the book that I used with sixth grade social studies, she's a name that comes up. So it'd be really cool if she, that this famous person that we still hear about today was the gal who draws Moses down. We don't know that for sure though. But he grows up in Pharaoh's court, and then he has to leave Egypt. Do you remember why he has to leave Egypt?
I wouldn't leave Egypt if I was Moses going out into the desert, but he had to, I guess. I watched the movie.
Yeah.
It seems like he got kicked out.
He kills a guy. Yeah, he kills a guy. He sees someone beating. He sees two Hebrews fighting. He says, "Hey, you guys shouldn't be fighting." And first he saw a slave driver beating one of the Hebrew slaves. This is when the Israelites were slaves in Egypt. And then he kills that guy and buries him. He thinks no one saw it, but it turns out he did, and he's discovered. And later on, he tells some people not to fight, and they say, who made you over us? You're going to kill us like you killed the other guy? And so he runs into the desert. But Moses is about 40 at that time. So during those times, Moses gained the skill. Moses is able to read and write, which is something that many people probably weren't able to do at that time. And Moses is the writer of the first 5 books of the Bible. Parts of God's covenant with his people read a lot like an ancient treaty, an agreement between nations, except it's between God and his people. It'd be interesting to think maybe Moses, one of the jobs he had working and living in Pharaoh's house was to help negotiate treaties or something. Who knows? But that's certainly the way that the parts of God's covenant with his people are written.
He must have been a pretty cool guy for the Egyptians to want to raise him, as a it was Pharaoh's daughter or sister who found him, correct?
I think Pharaoh's daughter, but the royal families of Egypt are really intermingled and messed up. So it's Pharaoh's daughter that finds him, and he gets to grow up basically as a prince of Egypt. Now, obviously not the one who's going to be the heir. Pharaoh's had a ton of kids. But still, he's in the top 1% of people living a life in Egypt for sure.
I knew that I was just testing that correct. And so with Moses, you have a kind of a theme in the Old Testament, or what, like I said before, the Tanakh, the Torah, is that you always have, or it seems like there's always one person selected, one person out of all these people doing their thing, and then one person is selected to be the leader, or be the person that just kind of drives things forward. And Moses, whether he liked it or not, was chosen for that, was called into that mission, so to speak. And it's a fascinating thing to think about when you read the Old Testament, kind of take a grasp of the fact that one person seems to always be chosen to be the leader for some reason. I don't know why. I mean, we could move that into the New Testament also, but it's just something fascinating just to think about. But Moses was a fascinating guy, and it said he had some kind of a speech impediment. So he might have had a bad stutter or something that he was embarrassed about, because he actually said that to God. He goes, why would you do this to me? Because I'm slow of tongue. So maybe it was something that he had some kind of a like I said, stutter problem is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that gets to us where God calls Moses, right? And that's from the burning bush. So God uses appearing from this bush that looks like it's on fire, but it's not. And God calls Moses to be the one to lead his people. And this time Moses is 80. For 40 years he's been a shepherd. Being a shepherd is a profession that Moses has, David has, Jesus talks about himself as a good shepherd. So he lives as being a shepherd is probably a pretty frustrating job sometimes, because sheep aren't, well, they're not always very smart animals. Usually they're dumb. They're good followers, but they're also kind of helpless at times. So being able to care for people and learn that patience are things that are skills that God may have used to grow in Moses at that time while he's a shepherd.
Moses was a shepherd.
Yeah.
What does that remind you of, everybody? So with Moses, the fascinating thing is that he becomes the lawgiver when he comes up and meets with the Lord, and then is talking about the Lord and the Israelites. Because remember, there's a long process now that the Israelites have left Egypt and all those kind of all the stuff that happened there. So he's having a conversation with God, and it goes kind of scary for him, because God is saying, this is what you're going to have to do. And he says, well, these are kind of a stiff-necked people, and they were having this conversation. So that's where you see these commandments coming down from God through Moses. They're not suggestions. They are rules and structures to run a society that is healthy. And you're very young people right now, but when you see a society that doesn't have structured rules and regulations that are followed, it usually falls apart. That's just kind of a hint on what happens right now in the 5 o'clock news, so to speak.
Yeah, and so as you mentioned earlier, Tim, Moses has kind of a speech issue, and so Moses has all these excuses when God calls him. Moses is saying, I don't want to go. I can't speak well. People aren't going to believe me. So God has miracles. He can turn a staff into a snake. He can put his hand and take it out of his coat with leprosy, put it back in, doesn't have leprosy anymore. And still Moses is saying, no. And God says, then I'll send your brother Aaron with you. So Aaron is Moses' brother's name. And he may have been the one who does a lot of the talking when you see Moses talking to Pharaoh. And there's one place where it kind of sounds a little bit different, and that might have been when Moses is the one who's actually talking. But you're right, Moses gets to give God's law to the people, the Ten Commandments. And I think one of the best explanations I've heard for the Ten Commandments is it's a set of operating instructions. As God's people, this is how you function, and it's going to be well for you. I have, almost everyone these days is carrying around a smartphone, right? And if we were to play frisbee with this, it might be a whole lot of fun. We might think it's a good idea or enjoying it, but in reality, this is the operating instructions would say, hey, don't throw that around. There's all sorts of cool things you can do on your smartphone, but using it as a frisbee is just going to get it broken. In the same way, God tells us as his children, hey, this is how you're my people. Stay away from doing these things because that's going to make your life more difficult. You're going to be disobeying me and doing the wrong thing, and you're going to hurt others and yourself in the process. So stay away from those things.
You know how hard it would be to get car insurance if there were not stop signs and traffic lights?
Would be.
It'd be virtually impossible. Those of us who have automobiles, and you kids will have them in about 4 or 5 years, there are rules and regulations we want to follow and have to follow whether we like it or not. Remember, Moses is somewhat similar to us. When you become a Christian and you want to talk to people about the Gospels, about the one true God and his plans for our lives, it's kind of scary. Think about Moses when he talks to God all this time and realizes, now wait a minute, some of these people are pretty mixed up. They believe in this and they believe in that, and they are Israelites, but they're kind of all over the map when it comes to their belief systems. And I'm going to have to go down there and tell them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then actually there's 613. But these 10 commandments, this is probably even going to go over well. They'll think I'm a bigot and whatever, so he was a little scared. So think about what happens when you're a Christian and you see your friends doing some stuff that is not right. And you're really nervous to say, should she be on that website, or should we be talking like this? There's these rules and regulations. You really shouldn't be doing that. It's pretty scared. Imagine it on a level where you have stood in the presence of God and he is commanding you or commissioning you to bring these laws, which we still follow basically to this day, to the world. And it was frightening because when you study the story of Moses, it didn't go well time and time again. You have people that are saying, okay, great, you have the law, and they break it time and time again. So it was a scary mission. I would have to say far more powerful than what we do as Christians in a way. But it's still, think about him, he's just a human being, told the truth, he finds out the truth, and then has to communicate that to people who probably won't believe him.
And we see God's grace and mercy in the stories. He continues to come after his people and rescue them and bring them back into the fold, like Moses could probably realize, this is a lot like me, how I had to keep going after those sheep. And what's comforting to me about the story of Moses is, here God takes this guy he can't speak well, he's a murderer, he's unsure of himself, and he's 80 years old. He thinks he's all washed up, and yet God still chooses him. And so if God can choose someone with all sorts of problems, well, then God can use you and me as well. And that's pretty comforting.
Look at our hair color. So I still got quite a while to maybe make the grade. So I ain't that old yet.
All right. So those are some things about Moses. Thank you for taking the time to be and talk about God's word with us. We'll move on, continuing in the Old Testament in our next video. See you later. Bye.